Every year, over 200,000 people vanish into the shadows of organized crime. Most never return. But what if I told you that one woman's abduction became the most dangerous, passionate, and impossible love story of the decade? When Alina Martinez was dragged into the darkness by the Mafia, she thought her life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. Can love really survive in a world built on violence and fear? Or was this Stockholm Syndrome disguised as romance? Buckle up, because this story is going to take you on a roller coaster of emotions you won't forget. This is the story of Alina Martinez, a brilliant 28-year-old art curator who had her whole life mapped out. A rising star in New York's competitive art world, engaged to a corporate lawyer planning a wedding at the plaza. She was living the dream, or so everyone thought. But on one rain-soaked October night, Alina's carefully constructed reality shattered into a million pieces. She was kidnapped by the Morty family, one of the most powerful and feared mafia dynasties on the East Coast. Her captor, Dante Morty, a man whose name was whispered in the underworld with equal parts respect and terror. He was supposed to be her jailer, her enemy, the villain in her story. But fate had other plans. What unfolded over the next 3 months wasn't just a tale of captivity. It was a story of transformation, forbidden passion, impossible choices, and a love that defied every rule, every expectation, and every ounce of common sense. This is Alina's story. This is Dante's redemption. This is proof that sometimes the heart follows its own dangerous path, consequences be damned. Let's dive deep into this wild, intoxicating, and utterly unforgettable journey. October 17th, that's the date Alina Martinez's old life ended. It was 11:47 p.m. when she finally locked the ornate brass doors of the Rothstein Gallery on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The exhibition opening that evening had been a triumph. She'd secured 3 major sales totaling over $2 million. Her boss had hinted at a promotion. Her fiancé, Marcus, had texted congratulations with plans to celebrate over the weekend. Everything was falling into place. The rain came down in torrents, the kind of downpour that turns New York streets into rivers. Alina clutched her Burberry trench coat tighter, her Jimmy Choo heels clicking rapidly against the slick pavement as she hurried toward her car parked 2 blocks away. The streets were eerily empty for Manhattan. The storm had driven everyone inside. She should have noticed the black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street. She should have felt the eyes watching her from the shadows. But Alina was distracted, mentally reviewing her calendar for tomorrow, thinking about the dry cleaning she needed to pick up, wondering if Marcus had remembered to call the caterer about their wedding menu tasting. She never saw them coming. One moment, Alina was fishing for her keys in her oversized Prada bag. The next, a large hand clamped over her mouth with such force she tasted blood. Strong arms wrapped around her body like steel cables, lifting her completely off the ground. She tried to scream, but the sound was muffled against a gloved palm that smelled of leather and cigarette smoke. 3 men in expensive black suits moved with military precision. Her phone, her lifeline, was torn from her grasp and smashed against the concrete, the screen spiderwebbing before it clattered into a storm drain. Her bag was tossed aside like garbage. Alina kicked and thrashed with everything she had, her heel connecting with someone's shin, earning a grunt of pain and a harsh word in Italian. "Stop fighting or we'll make this much worse," a gravelly voice hissed in her ear. The SUV's door was already open, engine running. Alina was thrown into the back seat so hard she hit her head on the opposite door. Before she could orient herself, 2 men climbed in on either side, pinning her between their massive frames. A 3rd man took the driver's seat and they were moving before the door even closed. "Please," Alina gasped, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Please, I don't understand. What do you want? I have money, my purse, there's cash, credit cards." "Shut up," the man to her left growled. "Who are you? Where are you taking me?" Alina's voice rose to a near scream. "Help, someone help me." A cloth bag was pulled over her head, plunging her into darkness. The smell was musty, suffocating. Alina's breathing became rapid and shallow. She was hyperventilating, panic clawing at her chest like a wild animal trying to escape. "Breathe slowly, lady," one of the men said, his tone almost bored. "You hyperventilate, you pass out, you hit your head, you die. Nobody wants that, yet." That single word, "yet," sent ice through Alina's veins. The drive felt endless. Without sight, every sense was heightened. She could hear the men's breathing, the occasional crackle of a radio, the rhythm of windshield wipers battling the rain. She felt every turn, every acceleration, every bump in the road. They drove for what she estimated was 2 hours, maybe 3, the city sounds gradually fading until there was only the hum of the engine and the storm. When the vehicle finally stopped, Alina was dragged out into the rain. She stumbled on the gravel, her heels useless on the uneven ground. Strong hands gripped her arms, guiding, no, forcing her forward. She heard the beep of a security system, the heavy slide of a gate opening, then gravel became stone. They were inside somewhere now. The rain sounds disappeared. Their footsteps echoed in what must have been a large space. Alina's mind raced through every crime documentary she'd ever watched, every news story about kidnapping victims. Statistics said the first 48 hours were critical. Most people who weren't found quickly were never found at all. Up the stairs, someone commanded. Alina was pushed forward, her legs shaking so badly she could barely climb. 1 step, 2, 10, 15, she counted them, trying to maintain some sense of control, some mental map of her prison. At the top, they turned left, walked down a long corridor, then stopped. A door opened with a heavy creak. Alina was shoved inside, stumbling forward. She heard the door slam shut behind her, followed by the definitive click of a lock engaging. For a moment, she stood frozen, the bag still over her head, too terrified to move. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled it off. The room that greeted her was not what she expected. It was beautiful, luxurious even. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in silk sheets that probably cost more than Alina's monthly rent. Antique furniture, a vanity, a wardrobe, a writing desk filled the room with old-world elegance. Thick Persian rugs covered hardwood floors. A crystal chandelier hung from an ornate ceiling. French doors led to what appeared to be a balcony, though heavy iron bars across them made it clear this wasn't a real exit. But it was still a prison. Alina ran to the French doors, yanking on them desperately. Locked. She ran to the main door, also locked. She pulled at the bars on the balcony doors until her hands bled, but they didn't budge even a millimeter. She screamed until her throat was raw, pounded on the door until her fists were bruised, but no one came. Finally, as dawn light began filtering through the curtains, Alina collapsed onto the floor, her designer dress torn and muddy, her perfect makeup smeared with tears and rain, her carefully styled hair a tangled mess. She pulled her knees to her chest and sobbed, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She thought of Marcus, who would wake up this morning to find her missing. She thought of her mother, who would answer the door to police asking questions. She thought of her father, whose face would crumble when he heard the news. Alina had no idea that her father already knew exactly where she was. She had no idea that her father was the reason she was here. And she had no idea that this beautiful prison was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, and about the fine line between captivity and choice. For 3 days, Alina existed in a state of suspended terror. Meals appeared at regular intervals, delivered by silent staff who wouldn't make eye contact and refused to answer any of her questions. The food was excellent, gourmet quality, but Alina could barely eat. She was too scared, too angry, too confused. She searched every inch of her room for escape routes. She tried breaking a mirror to use as a weapon. She attempted to pick the lock with a hairpin like in the movies, but succeeded only in breaking the hairpin. She rationed the small amount of water she was given, fearing they might try to drug her. At night, lying in the too soft bed in the too quiet room, Alina's mind spiraled to dark places. Who were these people? What did they want? Was this about ransom? Would they kill her once they got the money? The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing would have been. But on the 4th day, everything changed. On the 4th day, Dante Morty walked through her door, and Alina's world tilted on its axis in ways she never could have imagined. Alina had spent 4 days imagining her captors, ruthless men with dead eyes, cruel mouths, hands stained with blood. She'd prepared herself for a monster. Dante Morty was not what she expected. He walked through the door at exactly 6:15 a.m. on the 4th day, and Alina, who had been in a fitful sleep, jolted awake. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. He was tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of presence that filled a room effortlessly. Dark hair, slightly longer than fashionable, with threads of silver at the temples despite the fact that he couldn't have been much older than 35. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of espresso that seemed to look straight through her defenses. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Alina's car, a crisp white shirt open at the collar, and Italian leather shoes that gleamed despite the early hour. A Patek Philippe watch glinted on his wrist, the kind that cost 6 figures. Everything about him screamed power, money, and danger. But it was his eyes that stopped Alina cold. They weren't empty or cruel, they were complicated, intelligent, weary, haunted by something she couldn't quite name. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly cultured with just a trace of an Italian accent. "My name is Dante Morty. I apologize for the circumstances of your arrival." "Apologize?" Alina's fear crystallized instantly into rage. "You apologize?" She was on her feet, trembling with fury. "You kidnap me, throw a bag over my head, lock me in this room for 4 days, and you apologize like you spilled coffee on my shirt, like you bumped into me on the subway." Alina crossed the room in 3 quick strides, driven by adrenaline and 4 days of pent-up terror. She didn't think, she just reacted, raising her hand to slap him across the face. Dante caught her wrist mid-swing with reflexes like a snake, his grip firm but not painful. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, inches apart. Alina could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody, and feel the heat radiating from his body. "I wouldn't recommend that," Dante said quietly, releasing her wrist but not stepping back. "I may be more civilized than my men, but I'm still dangerous, Miss Martinez. Please don't forget that." "Then kill me," Alina spat, her voice breaking. "Because if you think I'm going to be a docile prisoner, if you think I'm going to make this easy for you, you're insane. So either kill me or let me go, but don't you dare apologize like any of this is okay." Something flickered in Dante's expression. Was it respect? Surprise? He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes cataloging every detail of her face. "You're not going to be killed," he finally said, moving to the window and gazing out at the sprawling grounds below. "And you'll be released, eventually, once your father fulfills his obligations." Alina's blood ran cold. "My father? What does my father have to do with this?" Dante turned back to her, and there was something almost like pity in his eyes. "Your father borrowed $3 million from my family 18 months ago. He used it to finance a real estate development in Queens Park Ridge Estates. The project failed, the money is gone, and Anthony Martinez has been avoiding our calls for 6 months." "No," Alina shook her head violently. "No, you're lying. My father would never. He's not." "Your father is a gambling addict, Miss Martinez," Dante continued, his voice matter-of-fact but not cruel. "He's been in debt to various criminal organizations for the better part of a decade. Usually he manages to pay them back. This time the hole was too deep, so he came to my family, who unfortunately were willing to lend to him against my advice." The room spun. Alina gripped the bedpost for support. Her father, her sweet, hard-working father who'd built his real estate business from nothing, who'd put her through Columbia, who'd walked her down the aisle at her engagement party, was a gambling addict, in debt to the Mafia. "You're lying," she whispered, but even as she said it, pieces started clicking into place. Her father's increasingly frequent business trips to Atlantic City and Vegas, the way her mother's smile had become strained over the past year, the sudden sale of their summer house in the Hamptons, which her father claimed was just downsizing, the way he'd been avoiding her calls recently. "I wish I were," Dante said. "You're here as collateral, Miss Martinez, insurance, if you will. Your father loves you, that much is clear from our research. We're betting he loves you enough to find a way to pay his debt. If he does, you go home unharmed. If he doesn't," he trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "How long?" Alina asked, her voice barely audible. "We've given him 90 days. 90 days? 3 months. Alina sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs no longer able to support her weight. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, her safety, all of it was an illusion. "I know this is difficult to process," Dante said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "For what it's worth, you won't be harmed while you're here. You'll be treated well. This room is yours. You'll have access to books, television, the internet, monitored of course, 3 meals a day, anything you need within reason." "Except my freedom," Alina said bitterly. "Except that," Dante acknowledged. He moved toward the door, and Alina felt a sudden, irrational panic at the thought of being alone again. "Wait," she called out. He paused, hand on the doorknob, looking back at her. "What if my father can't pay? What if he doesn't have the money?" Dante's expression was unreadable. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Miss Martinez." And then he was gone, the lock clicking shut behind him, leaving Alina alone with the devastating truth about her father and the terrifying uncertainty of her future. Over the next week and a half, a strange routine developed. Dante visited Alina's room every evening at 7 p.m., staying for exactly 1 hour. At first, Alina refused to speak to him, sitting in hostile silence while he attempted conversation. But Dante was patient, persistent, and infuriatingly intelligent. He brought her books from his personal library, first editions, rare volumes, texts on art history that were directly relevant to her work. When Alina finally broke her silence to argue about the interpretation of a Caravaggio painting, Dante smiled like he'd won a small victory. "You know art," Alina said, surprised despite herself. "My mother was an art historian before she married into this family," Dante replied. "She made sure I had a proper education even if I was destined for less cultural pursuits." Their conversations became a nightly ritual. They argued about everything: art, philosophy, politics, literature. Dante was widely read, wickedly intelligent, and had opinions on everything. Alina found herself looking forward to their debates even as she hated herself for it. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded one night about 2 weeks into her captivity. "These visits, the books, the conversation, what's the point?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Maybe I'm tired of being surrounded by people who can't challenge me intellectually. Maybe I'm curious about the kind of woman who slaps her captor on their first meeting. Or maybe," he looked up, meeting her eyes, "maybe I'm trying to remind myself that there's more to life than the world I was born into." It was the first glimpse of vulnerability Alina had seen from him, and it unsettled her more than his power ever had. As the third week turned into the fourth, the dynamics between Alina and Dante began to shift in ways neither of them could control or fully understand. Dante started allowing Alina out of her room, first just to the library, then to the garden, always with him present. The estate was massive, a sprawling mansion on 50 acres of private land, surrounded by forest and protected by state-of-the-art security. Escape was impossible, but at least Alina could breathe fresh air, feel sunshine on her face. They walked the gardens in the afternoons, Dante pointing out the various plants his mother had cultivated before her death 5 years earlier. Alina found herself learning his story in fragments: a childhood torn between his mother's gentle culture and his father's brutal business, a Harvard education interrupted by family obligations, dreams of being an architect that died when he was forced to take his place in the family organization. "I never wanted this life," Dante confessed one evening as they sat on a stone bench overlooking a rose garden. The setting sun painted everything gold and amber. "I wanted to build things, create beauty. Instead, I destroy, I intimidate, I collect debts and enforce rules through fear." "Then leave," Alina said simply. "Walk away." Dante laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. "You don't leave this family, you're born into it and you die in it. There's no exit, Alina, only deeper involvement or death." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and it sent an inexplicable shiver through her. Alina started to notice things about Dante, small details that didn't fit the Mafia heir persona. The way he was gentle with the estate's aging gardener, ensuring the man had the best medical care. How he anonymously funded a children's hospital, documents she'd glimpsed in his office. The sadness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. The way his jaw would tighten whenever his father called, his whole body tensing with some unspoken burden. "Who are you really?" Alina asked him one night, genuinely curious. They were in the library, a fire crackling in the massive fireplace, rain drumming against the windows. It felt surreally domestic. "I don't know anymore," Dante admitted, staring into his whiskey glass like it held answers. "I spent so long being what my father needed me to be, what the family required, that I'm not sure where the role ends and the real me begins. Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Alina whispered, thinking of her own carefully constructed life in New York. The right job, the right fiancé, the right apartment in the right neighborhood. Had she been living authentically or just playing a role too? It was a dangerous realization to have while imprisoned by the Mafia. By the 5th week, something had fundamentally changed between Alina and Dante, though neither would acknowledge it aloud. The touches became more frequent, accidental brushes of hands when passing books, Dante's hand on the small of Alina's back as he guided her through doorways, Alina fixing his tie without thinking during one of their conversations. Each touch was electric, charged with an awareness that neither could ignore. Alina started taking more care with her appearance, telling herself it was about maintaining dignity, not about the way Dante's eyes would darken when she wore the emerald dress that had been mysteriously added to the wardrobe in her room. Dante found excuses to spend more time with her, checking on her welfare, ensuring she was comfortable, bringing her art supplies when she mentioned missing her work. One evening, Dante brought her a canvas, oils, and brushes. "I thought you might be going stir-crazy without creating," he said simply. Alina stared at the supplies, tears suddenly burning her eyes. It was the most thoughtful thing anyone had done for her in years, including her own fiancé who'd never understood her need to create. She painted late into the night, and when Dante came to check on her at midnight, he found her covered in paint, lost in her work. "You're talented," he said, studying the abstract piece she'd created, all dark colors and chaotic energy. "It's angry," Alina replied. "Everything I'm feeling right now, the fear, the fury, the confusion, it's all there." Dante stepped closer, studying not just the painting but her face. "It's also beautiful. Pain can create beauty, Alina. Some of the greatest art in history came from suffering." "Is that supposed to make me feel better about being a hostage?" she asked, but there was no real anger in her voice anymore. "No," Dante said softly, "nothing can make this okay, but maybe we can find moments of humanity in an inhumane situation." Their eyes met and the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Dante reached up slowly, giving Alina time to pull away. She didn't. His thumb brushed across her cheek, removing a smudge of paint. "You have paint everywhere," he murmured, his voice rough. "I'm a messy painter," Alina whispered back, her heart hammering. For a moment, they stood frozen, inches apart, the line between captor and captive blurring into something dangerous and intoxicating. Then Dante stepped back, his expression torn between desire and duty. "Good night, Alina," he said, and left quickly, leaving her standing alone in a room that suddenly felt much colder. The next 2 weeks were torture of a different kind. The attraction between them was undeniable now, simmering beneath every conversation, every glance, every interaction. But it was also impossible, wrong, dangerous. Alina tried to remind herself daily that this was Stockholm Syndrome, that her feelings weren't real, that Dante was her captor regardless of how complicated he seemed. But then he would say something insightful, or show her a kindness, or look at her with those haunted eyes, and all her rational arguments would crumble. Dante, for his part, was clearly struggling. He started arriving later for their nightly talks, leaving earlier. He was more distant, more formal. But Alina could see the cracks in his armor, the way his hands would clench when she got too close, the intensity in his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking, the tension in his shoulders that suggested an internal war. One afternoon in the garden, Alina's phone suddenly rang, the personal phone Dante had recently allowed her to have with monitored access. It was Marcus, her fiancé, the man she'd almost forgotten about in the surreal bubble of the estate. "Alina, thank God, are you okay? Where are you? The police have been." "I'm fine, Marcus," Alina said, aware that Dante was standing 10 feet away, his back rigid. "I can't explain everything, but I'm safe. I need you to know that when I get home, we need to talk about us, about everything." "What, Alina, you were kidnapped. This isn't the time." "I know, just trust me, we need to talk." When she ended the call, Dante still hadn't turned around. "You're calling off your engagement," he said flatly. "How did you?" "I can hear it in your voice." He finally turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "You've realized he isn't right for you." "What I've realized," Alina said, taking a step toward him, "is that I was settling. I was living the life I thought I should want instead of the life I actually want. Marcus is a good man, but we've never had." "What?" Dante challenged, taking a step closer. "Say it." "This," Alina breathed. "Whatever this is between us, this intensity, this connection that scares me and exhilarates me and makes no logical sense." "You're right, it makes no sense." Dante's voice was harsh, but his eyes were burning. "I'm your captor, you're my hostage. This is wrong on every possible level." "I know. You should hate me." "I know. In 6 weeks your father will pay his debt and you'll leave here. You'll go back to your real life and this will become a nightmare you try to forget." "And is that what you want?" Alina demanded, close enough now to feel his breath on her face. "For me to forget you, forget this?" Dante's control finally snapped. He grabbed Alina's face in both hands and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of 2 months of denial. Alina kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. It was explosive, overwhelming, completely inappropriate, and absolutely inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he whispered. "Completely," Alina agreed. "We can't do this." "I know." But when Dante kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent, Alina didn't pull away. She was done lying to herself about what she felt. The next 2 weeks were a study in contradiction. By day, they maintained the pretense of captor and hostage, their interactions professional and distant whenever staff or security were present. But at night, in the privacy of the library or the garden, they couldn't deny what was growing between them. Dante told Alina things he'd never told anyone, about the first man he'd killed at 19, forced by his father to prove his loyalty, about the nightmares that still woke him, about the charities he secretly funded to atone for his sins even though he knew no amount of good could balance the scales, about his mother's death which he suspected wasn't the car accident his father claimed. Alina shared her own truths about feeling like a fraud in the art world, constantly performing instead of being authentic, about her father's emotional distance throughout her childhood, which now made sense given his gambling addiction, about her fear that she was incapable of real love, that she'd been about to marry Marcus not out of passion but out of obligation. "You're capable of love," Dante said one night as they lay on a blanket in the garden staring up at the stars. "It was risky being out here alone, but they'd grown reckless. You're one of the most passionate people I've ever met." "Then why have I never felt this before?" Alina turned her head to look at him. "Why have I never felt with anyone what I feel when I'm with you?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. Maybe because no one else was worth the risk of actually feeling. Maybe because everyone else was safe and you've spent your whole life choosing safety over authenticity. It was painfully, perfectly true. "And you?" Alina asked. "Why me? Why now?" "Because you see me," Dante said simply. "Not the monster, not the heir, not the role. You see the man underneath all of that and you don't look away. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" They made love that night under the stars. And it was nothing like Alina had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it was the collision of two souls who'd been sleepwalking through life finally waking up. It was dangerous and beautiful and utterly impossible. Afterwards, wrapped in Dante's arms, Alina felt something she'd never felt before, complete, like she'd found a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. "We can't keep doing this," Dante murmured into her hair. "It's not fair to you." "Why not?" "Because in 2 weeks your father will make the final payment, and you'll go home, back to your real life, and he tightened his arms around her. "I have to stay in mine. There's no happy ending here, Alina." "Then let's not think about endings," Alina whispered. "Let's just have now." But even as she said it, both knew now wouldn't be enough. Alina's time at the estate was nearly over. Tomorrow her father would make the final payment. He'd somehow managed to liquidate assets, take new loans, scrape together the $3 million. Tomorrow, Alina would be free to return to New York, to her gallery, to her old life. She should have been ecstatic. Instead, she felt like she was preparing for a funeral. The entire day, Alina and Dante barely spoke, both consumed by what was coming. The air was heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of what they'd found and were about to lose. That evening, Dante came to Alina's room, their room really, as he'd been spending every night there for the past 2 weeks, rules and protocols be damned. His face was drawn, exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, which Alina knew he hadn't. "Alina," he started, his voice rough, "we need to talk about tomorrow." "I know," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. Dante paced the room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. When he finally spoke, the words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "Come with me, not tomorrow, not in the exchange, but later. Give me a month to arrange things, to set up new identities, to find a way out of this family. We'll disappear. South America, Europe, somewhere they can't find us. We'll start over, completely new lives." "Dante, I know it's insane. I know I'm asking you to give up everything. But Alina, I can't let you go. These 3 months with you have been the only time in my entire life I've felt truly alive, truly human. I love you. I'm completely, insanely in love with you, and the thought of watching you walk out of here tomorrow is killing me." Alina's heart shattered and soared simultaneously. "You love me," she breathed. Desperately, completely, impossibly, Dante knelt in front of her, taking her hands. Say yes, say you'll wait for me to arrange our escape, say you'll take this leap with me. For a moment, Elena let herself imagine it, a life with Dante, free from both their pasts, starting fresh somewhere beautiful and far away. No more Mafia, no more expectations, no more performing for anyone, just them building something real. Yes, she whispered, yes, I'll wait, I'll go anywhere with you. Dante pulled her into a kiss that tasted like relief and desperation and promise. They made love slowly, savoring every touch, every kiss, trying to memorize each other for the separation ahead. But they should have known it was too good to be true. At 2:47 a.m., the door to Elena's room exploded inward. Armed men flooded in, shouting, pulling Dante away from Elena with brutal efficiency. Elena screamed, grabbing for a robe, her heart hammering with terror. And then he walked in, Salvatore Morti, Dante's father, flanked by his most trusted capos. The patriarch was 73, silver-haired, impeccably dressed even at this hour, and radiating a cold fury that made the room's temperature drop 10 degrees. So, Salvatore said, his accented English clipped and precise. The rumors are true, my son, my heir, has been fucking the hostage. Father, Dante started, but Salvatore held up a hand, silencing him. Do you have any idea what you've done? Salvatore's voice was deceptively calm, which made it more terrifying. Do you understand the weakness you've shown? Word has already spread through the organization. Dante Morti has gone soft over some girl. Our enemies smell blood. Our allies question my family's strength. You've compromised everything I've built. I don't care, Dante said, his voice steady despite the guns trained on him. I'm done, father, done with this family, done with this life. Tomorrow, Elena walks out of here free, and eventually so do I. Salvatore laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed off the walls. You think you can just walk away? You think I'll allow my only son, my heir, to abandon everything for some spoiled art curator? You don't have a choice, Dante said, stepping protectively in front of Elena. Actually, Salvatore said, his smile turning sinister, I have several choices and I've already made my decision. He turned to one of his men. Bring him in. The door opened again and two guards dragged in a man Elena barely recognized, gaunt, bruised, terrified. It took her several seconds to realize she was looking at her father, Anthony Martinez. Dad, Elena's voice cracked. Oh my God, what did you do to him? Nothing yet, Salvatore said casually. Your father made his final payment this morning as agreed. He should be on his way home, but we had a conversation, and I learned some interesting things. Tell them, Anthony, tell them what you told me. Anthony Martinez could barely lift his head. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Elena, I'm so sorry, I couldn't make the payment, I was 50,000 short, I lied, I told them I had it all, but I didn't. Elena's blood turned to ice. Which means, Salvatore continued, our agreement is void, the debt remains unpaid, and Miss Martinez remains our property. He turned his cold gaze to Dante. You wanted her, you can have her, but not as your lover, as your responsibility, as your eternal reminder of what happens when a Morty shows weakness. What are you saying? Dante demanded. Salvatore's smile was that of a snake. I'm saying Miss Martinez will remain here permanently as an incentive for your continued cooperation. You will fulfill your duties to this family. You will make no more foolish plans of escape. You will be the heir I raised you to be, and if you deviate even slightly from my expectations. He pulled out a gun and pressed it to Anthony's temple. Her father dies, then we move on to her mother, her sister, her friends. One by one, everyone she loves will pay for your defiance. You're a monster, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm a businessman, Salvatore corrected. And business requires leverage. My son has shown me his weakness, so you become his chain binding him to this family forever. Dante's face had gone white. Elena could see him calculating, searching for a way out, finding none. They were trapped, completely and utterly trapped. However, Salvatore continued, holstering his weapon, I'm not unreasonable. Elena, you may remain here as Dante's companion. You'll be treated well, want for nothing, live in comfort. You simply can never leave. Consider it a gilded cage. Many women would envy your position, the love of a powerful man, unlimited luxury, protection. It's still a prison, Elena spat. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before seducing my son, Salvatore replied coldly. He turned to Dante. You have a choice, boy. Send her away tomorrow as planned. She'll be free, but I guarantee her father and everyone she loves will be dead within the month. Or she stays, you obey, and her family lives. What will it be? It wasn't a choice. It was an impossible, soul-crushing trap. Dante looked at Alina, his expression shattered. She could see him breaking apart inside, could see the man she loved being crushed under the weight of impossible decisions. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Alina made her choice. I'll stay, she said firmly, stepping forward. I'll stay and Dante will do what you ask. Just leave my family alone, please. No, Dante grabbed her arm. Alina, no, you don't know what you're agreeing to. A life here with no freedom, no choice. I'm choosing you, Alina said, turning to face him, cupping his face in her hands. I'm choosing this right now, not because I'm forced to, but because the alternative is losing you and knowing my family is in danger. At least this way, we're together. You'll regret it, Dante said, his voice breaking. You'll grow to hate me, hate this place. Maybe, Alina admitted. Or maybe we find a way to make this work. Maybe we survive this together and find moments of happiness in between the darkness. I don't know what the future holds, Dante, but I know I'd rather face it with you than without you. Salvador clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the tense room. How touching, very well, the matter is settled. Alina Martinez remains here as my son's companion. Dante returns to his duties tomorrow. And Anthony, he gestured to the broken man, get him cleaned up and send him home. But remember, Anthony, we know where you live. We know where your wife works, where your younger daughter goes to school. Keep your mouth shut and they stay safe, understood? Anthony nodded miserably, not even able to look at his daughter. Good, now everyone out, this circus is over. Salvatore strode toward the door, his men following like a dark tide. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Dante and Alina. You wanted her, Dante, you have her. I hope she's worth the price you'll both pay. The door slammed shut, leaving them alone in the wreckage of their escape plan. For a long moment, neither spoke. Dante sank onto the bed, his head in his hands, his entire body radiating defeat. Alina sat beside him, her own tears falling silently. I'm sorry, Dante finally whispered. God, Alina, I'm so sorry I did this to you. I should have been stronger, should have kept my distance, should have. Stop, Alina said firmly. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, what your father did is not your fault. The situation we're in is not your fault. And my choice to stay, that's on me. Nobody forced my hand. I chose you, Dante. I chose us. But you've given up everything, your freedom, your career, your life. I've given up a life that was making me miserable, Alina corrected. Yes, the circumstances are horrible. Yes, your father is a monster. Yes, this is far from ideal. But Dante, I was already in a prison of my own making in New York. At least here, at least with you, I feel alive. I feel real. You say that now, Dante said bitterly. But what about in 6 months, a year, 5 years, when you've spent so long trapped here that you can't remember what freedom feels like? Alina was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said, then we find a way out, not tomorrow, not next month, but eventually. We're smart, we're resourceful, and we have something your father will never understand. We have each other. That makes us stronger than he knows. Dante pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I love you, he whispered, and I swear to you on everything I am, I will find a way to give you your freedom back, even if it takes years, even if it costs me everything, I will find a way. We'll find a way, Alina corrected, together. They held each other through the remainder of the night, grieving the future they'd lost, steeling themselves for the fight ahead. The dawn that broke through the windows wasn't the dawn of Alina's freedom, it was the dawn of something new, something complicated, something that would test them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face it together, and sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks later, Alina settled into her new reality with a resilience that surprised even her. The estate was still a prison, but she refused to be a prisoner in spirit. She claimed a sunroom as her art studio, filling it with canvases and the chaotic beauty of her work. She befriended some of the household staff, learning their stories, treating them with kindness in a place that often showed none. Dante, meanwhile, threw himself into his family duties with renewed intensity, but with a difference. He started subtly documenting everything. Every illegal transaction, every corrupt official on the family payroll, every piece of evidence that could potentially bring down the Morty empire. It was dangerous, meticulous work that would take years to compile, but it was a start. They developed their own private language of resistance, small acts of defiance that Salvatore would never notice but that kept their spirits alive. Elena would paint hidden symbols of freedom into her artwork. Dante would quietly redirect family money to charities and victim support funds. They were playing a long game, the kind that required patience and strategy. At night, in the privacy of their room, they planned and dreamed and held on to hope. "Tell me about the life we'll have," Elena would say, curled against Dante's chest. "When this is all over, when we're free." And Dante would paint pictures with words, a small house by the ocean, maybe in Portugal or Greece. Elena with her own gallery showing work by unknown artists who deserved recognition. Dante designing buildings, creating beauty instead of destruction. Children perhaps running on beaches and knowing nothing of the darkness their parents had escaped. Were these fantasies? Maybe. But they were fantasies that kept them human, kept them fighting, kept them believing that there was a light at the end of this very dark tunnel. The day came when everything changed. Dante received a phone call from an FBI agent he'd been secretly communicating with for months, feeding information in exchange for immunity and witness protection. The Bureau was finally ready to move on the Morty family. "It's time," Dante told Elena that evening. "They're raiding the compound tomorrow at dawn. Will be extracted during the chaos. New identities, new lives, protection, everything we've been waiting for." Elena should have been elated. Instead, she felt terror. "Your father will fight, people will die." "I know," Dante said grimly, "but if we don't do this now, we never will, and Elena, I can't watch you waste away in this place, I won't." They spent that night in each other's arms, barely sleeping, waiting for dawn and freedom and whatever came after. The raid began at 5:42 a.m. with the sound of helicopters and battering rams. The FBI came with overwhelming force, dozens of agents, SWAT teams, warrants for everyone in the Morty organization's upper echelon. Dante and Elena were already awake, dressed, ready. They were supposed to wait in their room for the extraction team, but the sound of gunfire erupting from the East Wing changed everything. "He's fighting back," Dante said, his face pale. "My father is making them come through us. He'd rather people die than surrender." They could hear shouting, more gunfire, the chaos of a full-scale assault. Then their door burst open, not with FBI agents but with Salvatore Morty himself, wild-eyed and clutching a gun. "You," he snarled at Dante. "You did this, you betrayed your own blood." "I freed myself from a legacy of blood," Dante countered, positioning himself between his father and Elena. "It's over, father. The FBI has everything, the books, the recordings, the evidence. Surrender now and maybe you'll live." "Live?" Salvatore's laugh was unhinged. "Live in a cage, branded a traitor by my own son? I'd rather die, and I'll take you both with me." He raised the gun, but Elena was faster. She grabbed a heavy bronze sculpture from the dresser and hurled it with all her strength. It struck Salvatore's arm, sending the gun clattering across the floor. In that instant, Dante lunged forward, tackling his father. They crashed into furniture, destroying the room's elegant facade. It was brutal, primal, years of resentment and control erupting into physical violence. Elena scrambled for the gun, her hands shaking. She'd never held a weapon before, but she pointed it at the struggling men, trying to get a clear angle. "Freeze, FBI!" Agents poured into the room, weapons drawn. Dante immediately raised his hands, stepping away from his father. Salvatore, bloodied and beaten, glared at his son with pure hatred. "You were never my son," Salvatore spat. "You were always weak." "No," Dante said quietly. "I was always human, you just never understood the difference." As agents hauled Salvatore away in handcuffs, Elena dropped the gun and ran into Dante's arms. They held each other as the compound filled with law enforcement, as the Morty Empire crumbled around them as their nightmare finally ended. 2 hours later, in a secured FBI facility, Elena and Dante gave their statements. The agents were professional, efficient, and made it clear that Dante's cooperation had been invaluable in bringing down not just the Morty family, but several other criminal organizations connected to them. "You'll both be placed in witness protection," Agent Sarah Chen explained. "New identities, new location, financial support until you're established. The program will monitor threats, but given the magnitude of this takedown, you should be relatively safe. Most of the leadership will be behind bars for life." What about my family? Alina asked. My father, my mother, my sister. They'll be protected as well and relocated if necessary. Your father is also facing charges for his involvement, but given his cooperation and the coercion involved, he'll likely receive a reduced sentence. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was an ending. A chance to start over, to leave the darkness behind. The small coastal town of Cascais, Portugal was everything Dante had promised and more. The house wasn't large, just a modest 3-bedroom with a view of the ocean and a studio that caught the perfect morning light for painting. Alina stood at her easel, working on a piece for her first solo exhibition at a local gallery. The painting was abstract but hopeful, all bright colors and sweeping gestures, completely different from the dark, angry work she'd created in captivity. Coffee, Dante said, appearing behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He'd been up since dawn, working on architectural designs for a community center the town was planning. His firm was small but growing, and he'd never been happier. You're distracting me, Alina said, but she leaned back into his embrace. That's the plan, he murmured, kissing her neck. They'd been married 3 months ago in a simple ceremony on the beach, with just the local priest and 2 witnesses. No mafia, no society expectations, no performing for anyone. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chose to build something beautiful from the ashes. Life wasn't perfect. Alina still had nightmares sometimes. Dante still carried guilt about the lives his family had destroyed. They were both in therapy, working through trauma that would take years to fully process, but they were free, they were safe, and they were together. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked quietly. Everything you gave up. Alina turned in his arms to face him. I gave up a life that was killing me slowly. What I have now, this life with you, building something real, this is what I always wanted. I just didn't know it until a rainy night in October changed everything. Best kidnapping ever? Dante asked with a wry smile. Alina laughed, the sound bright and genuine. You know that's incredibly problematic, right? I know, but also true, Alina admitted. In the most complicated, messy, should probably never tell our future children the details way possible. They kissed as the Portuguese sun streamed through the windows, painting everything gold. It was a new day, a new life, a new beginning. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined them. Outside, waves crashed against the shore in an eternal rhythm. Inside, 2 people who'd found love in the most impossible circumstances built a life worth living. And sometimes, that's the greatest triumph of all, not the fairy tale ending, but the messy, hard-won, deeply human choice to keep choosing love, keep choosing hope, keep choosing each other. Every single day. So what can we take away from Alina and Dante's extraordinary story? First, that love doesn't follow rules or timelines or logical patterns. It emerges in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the darkest circumstances. But context matters. Alina's story is unique, dangerous, and not something to romanticize lightly. Stockholm Syndrome is real, and most kidnapping situations don't end with FBI raids and new lives in Portugal. What makes Alina and Dante's story compelling isn't just the forbidden romance, it's the transformation. Alina learned that she'd been living a performance of a life rather than an authentic one. Her kidnapping, as traumatic as it was, forced her to confront who she really was beneath the expectations and roles she'd been playing. She discovered strength she didn't know she had, made impossible choices, and ultimately chose a path based on her own desires rather than what she thought she should want. Dante's journey was equally profound. Born into a world of violence and corruption, he'd believed he was trapped by blood and legacy. But Alina showed him that redemption was possible, that change required courage, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is betray everything you've known for the chance to become something better. Their story teaches us about resilience, the ability to find humanity even in inhumane situations, to create moments of beauty in the midst of darkness, and to believe in the possibility of change even when circumstances seem impossible. It's also a reminder that freedom isn't just physical. Alina was technically free in her old life, but she was imprisoned by expectations, by fear of disappointing others, by the weight of living inauthentically. Sometimes our biggest prisons are the ones we build for ourselves. Most importantly, their story shows us that survival isn't enough. True triumph comes from choosing to remain human, compassionate, and hopeful even when the world gives you every reason to become hard and bitter. Alina and Dante could have let their circumstances destroy them, but instead, they used those circumstances as a catalyst for transformation. Today, 3 years after that fateful October night, Alina runs a successful gallery in Cascais that focuses on giving voice to unknown artists. Dante's architectural firm specializes in community spaces, libraries, schools, parks, buildings that serve people rather than power. They have a daughter, Sophia, who knows nothing of mafia empires or witness protection. To her, her parents are just mom and dad living a quiet life by the sea. The past hasn't been erased. Alina still paints pieces that reflect her journey, and Dante still cooperates with ongoing investigations into organized crime. But the past no longer controls them. They've taken their pain and used it as the foundation for something beautiful, something real, something worth fighting for. Is their story a fairy tale? No. Is it complicated and morally ambiguous? Absolutely. But it's also proof that people can change, that love can survive impossible odds, and that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected places. Alina was kidnapped by the Mafia, yes. But more importantly, she found herself, found her voice, and found a love worth risking everything for. So what do you think about Alina and Dante's story? Is this the most dangerous love story ever told, or is it actually the most hopeful? Could you imagine making the choices they made, staying in captivity for love, betraying your own family for the chance at redemption, starting completely over in a foreign country? Here's the real question that keeps me up at night. Was Alina's love for Dante real, or was it trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome? The line between authentic connection and psychological survival mechanism is incredibly thin in situations like this. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your perspectives on this complex story. And here's another angle to consider. If Dante hadn't betrayed his family, if he just kept Alina as his captive companion forever, would that still be a love story? Or does love require freedom and choice? Can love that begins in captivity ever be truly authentic? These are the questions that make this story so fascinating and so deeply controversial. If you found this story as compelling as I did, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm building a series on the most shocking, unexpected, and controversial love stories from around the world, real stories that challenge everything we think we know about love, choice, and human connection. Check out the playlist on the screen right now for more stories like this, including the woman who fell in love with her husband's killer, the detective who married the serial killer she was investigating, and the arranged marriage that turned into the greatest love story of the 21st century. Trust me, these stories will blow your mind. Also, drop a comment telling me what story you want to hear next. Should I cover more mafia romances, more unexpected redemption stories, more love in captivity narratives? You guide the content and I'll deliver the stories. And please, if you have your own story about finding love in unexpected circumstances, or if you have strong opinions about whether Alina's story represents true love or trauma, share it in the comments. This channel is about more than just me telling stories. It's about building a community where we can explore these complex human experiences together. Finally, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the story, even if it made you uncomfortable. Sometimes the best stories are the ones that challenge us, that make us question our assumptions, that refuse to fit neatly into good or bad categories. Thank you so much for watching, for engaging, for being part of this journey. I'll see you in the next video where we'll dive into another story that proves truth is stranger and often more compelling than fiction. Until then, stay curious, stay open-minded, and remember, love doesn't always follow the rules we think it should.